I found the receipt on a Tuesday afternoon. A filing cabinet. Third drawer. A folder labeled Household 2022. Not hidden. Filed. Between a utility bill and a dentist invoice, like it was nothing. Like it was ordinary. The receipt was from a jewelry consignment shop on Millbrook Avenue. Dated 2 years ago. It listed 3 items. 1 pearl necklace. 1 sapphire ring. 1 gold bracelet. Italian. Circa 1940s. Total received, $8,400. I recognized all 3 pieces before I finished reading the first line. They had been my grandmother Rose's. She had shown them to me when I was 12, one at a time, and told me the story of each one. She had told me they were mine. She had told me while she was still alive, in her own voice, at her own kitchen table. I stood in my parents' spare room with the receipt in my hand. And the thing that hit me, before the grief, before the anger, before anything else, was the folder, Household 2022. Between the utility bill and the dentist invoice, they had filed it the way you file something you intend to forget. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found when I went back. My name is Nadia. I'm 27 years old. My grandmother Rose was the most specific person I have ever known. That is the highest possible praise I can give anyone. She was specific in the way certain people are specific. Deliberately, as though she had decided early that precision was the only honest way to exist. She used exact words. She found the inexact ones frustrating. She kept very little, but what she kept mattered. When I was 12, she sat me at the kitchen table in her apartment and brought out a wooden box from the bedroom. Plain. No decoration. A small brass latch she opened with the practiced ease of someone who had opened the same thing thousands of times. Inside, 3 pieces of jewelry. A pearl necklace. Long, single strand. Small gold clasp in the shape of a flower. It had come from her own grandmother, who had brought it from Naples when she emigrated in 1947. 3 generations before I was born. Italy before that. Looking back now, she was not just showing me jewelry. She was placing evidence. A sapphire ring. Oval stone, deep blue, set in yellow gold. Her husband's mother's engagement ring, repaired twice, was never replaced. A gold bracelet. Thin, Italian, engraved. She had bought it herself in 1962. First real paycheck. First real job, she said. I bought it because I wanted to mark that moment. That I had earned something. That I could choose something for myself. She held all 3 out. She said, "These are not valuable the way most things people call valuable are valuable." I said, "What way then?" she said. "They carry time with them. When you hold one of these, you're holding the moment it came from," she said. "Things like this are rare. Most things don't carry anything. These do." She put them back in the box. She said, "When I'm gone, these go to you. Not to the estate. Not to be divided. To you. I want you to know that now, while I can tell you myself." I said, "Why me?" She looked at me. She said, "Because you asked the right question." Looking back now, she was being deliberate about the record. She said it when I was 12. She said it again when I was 20. She said it in the last year of her life. 3 times. On the record. In her own voice. She was not careless about her wishes. She was building a file. Looking back now, I should have understood that a person who builds files expects other people to honor them. She trusted my parents completely with that expectation. That was the part she couldn't protect herself from. My sister Mara never asked about the jewelry. Not because she didn't love Rose. She did, in her own way. Mara loves broadly. She showed up with groceries. She drove Rose to appointments. The practical love of someone who moves through the world by doing. But she never sat at that kitchen table and asked what kind of value. Rose knew the difference. She made her choice. She said it out loud. 3 times. And she died believing that was enough. The spare room. Tuesday. A normal afternoon. My mother had asked me to help sort through the filing cabinet. She was reorganizing and couldn't remember half of what was in there. I'd been there an hour. Old receipts. Insurance documents. School records from my childhood. The ordinary archaeology of a family's administrative life. 3rd drawer. Household 2022. Pearl necklace. Sapphire ring. Gold bracelet. Italian, circa 1940s. $8,400. I stood with it for 3 minutes without moving. Not from shock. From recognition. The kind that arrives when you understand something you have not been understanding for 2 years. And then I thought of something that made the recognition worse. My sister Mara's accident was 2.5 years ago. Her rehabilitation bills, the gap that insurance hadn't covered, had arrived 6 to 8 months after. This receipt was dated 8 months after the accident. $8,400. The gap amount. I had the number in my head from the family conversations at the time. I had the receipt in my hand now. They matched exactly. And that was before I turned the receipt over. On the back of the consignment receipt, handwritten in blue ink, was a note, not from the shop. My mother's handwriting. 3 words, for Mara's bills. She had written it on the back and filed it, not to hide it, to remember what it was for. She had filed it as a record of what she had done and why. That's the thing that stayed with me longest. She had documented it, in her own handwriting, the way Rose had documented her wishes in her own voice. Both of them are keeping records. One of them honors the other's record. That's where I was standing when I put the receipt in my bag. I put it at the bottom of my bag, under my wallet, under my keys. Said nothing to my mother, who was in the next room. Finished helping her for 2 more hours. The ordinary texture of a Tuesday afternoon that had stopped being ordinary. I drove home. I called Petra. Petra has been my closest friend since we were 19. She listens to the full thing before she responds. She doesn't interrupt. She waits. And then she says the precise thing, which is a quality I value more than almost anything in a person. I told her about the receipt. I told her about the back of the receipt. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know when the decision was made?" I said. "What do you mean?" She said. "The receipt is dated 8 months after the accident. But when did they decide to sell? Was it reactive? Accident happened, bills came, they looked around for a solution. Or was it earlier?" I sat with that question. I said, "I don't know," she said. "Find out. Because the timing of the decision changes what it means." That question. When did they decide? Sent me somewhere I hadn't expected to go. I called my cousin Daniel the next morning. Daniel is my mother's sister's son. He had been close to Rose and present in the weeks after her death in ways I couldn't always manage. I lived further away. He had also been around my parents more than I had during the worst of Mara's recovery. I didn't explain why I was asking. I said, "Daniel, in the months after Rose died, do you remember my parents talking about the estate? About the jewelry specifically?" He said, "I remember your mom mentioning something once. That the jewelry had already been earmarked." I said, "Earmarked how?" He said. I didn't ask exactly. I assumed it meant allocated to the family. But she said in a way that made me think the decision had already been made about what to do with it. I said, "When was this?" He said, "Around the time of Mara's accident, maybe just after." I said, "Around the time of the accident?" He said, "Yes. Things were very stressful then." I put the phone down. Just after the accident, which meant the decision had been made before the estate fully closed. Before I'd been told the jewelry was being assessed. Before I'd been told they'd keep looking. The assessment was the sale. The looking was already over. They had been telling me, "We'll keep looking." Well, they already knew exactly where the pieces were and where they were going. That wasn't what made me stop. What made me stop was something I realized sitting at that kitchen table with the phone in my hand. My mother had called me 2 weeks after the accident. Not about Mara's bills, a normal call. Asking how I was doing. Asking if I was sleeping. She had called to check on me while the decision about Rose's jewelry was already made. She had asked if I was sleeping. I said, "I'm okay, Mom. How's Mara?" She said, "Improving. Day by day." That was all. She had said nothing about what was already in motion. I sat with that for a long time. Then I drove to Millbrook Avenue. The consignment shop was exactly what you'd expect. Clean. Quiet. Glass cases full of things that had belonged to other people. I told the woman at the counter I was looking into items consigned by my family 2 years ago. I gave the account details from the receipt. She pulled up the file. She said, "Yes. 3 items. Consigned under the name Louise Varro. My mother's name." I said, "Were all 3 items sold?" She said, "2 were sold within the first 6 weeks. The necklace and the ring." She said, "The bracelet. The gold Italian one. It sat for a while. We actually still have it listed in our archive, but it was transferred to our secondary location when it didn't move. We don't take items back usually, but if a family member wanted to inquire about purchasing it." I said, "It's still there." She said, "It was as of last month." "I can check." She made a call. I stood at the glass counter in that quiet shop and waited. 45 seconds. She hung up. She said, "Yes, it's still there." "It hasn't sold," I said. "Can you hold it?" She said, "I need someone to authorize the hold." I said, "I'll have my father call you today." I walked out. I sat in my car on Millbrook Avenue and thought about something Rose had said in 1962. I bought it because I wanted to mark the moment. That I had chosen something for myself. The bracelet had been sitting in a secondary location for 2 years, waiting. The way certain things wait when they haven't found where they belong yet. I went back to the filing cabinet the following weekend. My mother had permitted me to take anything from my own childhood. I had a reason to go back. I went through the household 2022 folder again. Carefully this time. At the very back of the folder, behind the receipt, was a small white envelope. My name is on it. My mother's handwriting. Inside, a small gold locket. Round, about the size of a large coin. Plain surface, except for one small engraved initial. R. Rose. I opened it. A photograph so small I had to hold it at the right angle to see it. Two people in front of a building. Old clothes. Old light. A woman with the specific shape of cheekbones and the way of holding her shoulders that I recognized. My grandmother as a young woman. The shop had not taken this one. Too personal. Too small a resale value. And there had been an envelope with my name on it in a drawer for 2 years. My parents had meant to give it to me. The right moment never came because the conversation around it was too difficult to have. I held the locket for a long time, and I understood something that made me both sadder and steadier. They had not forgotten me. They had been afraid. That's different from forgetting. But it changes what the conversation needs to be. I did not call my parents immediately. I have learned, in 27 years of being their daughter, that immediate is reactive, and reactive is not the same as honest. Honest takes a little longer. I talked to Petra. I talked to my therapist. I sat on a Thursday evening with the receipt and the locket on my kitchen table and asked myself what I actually needed from the conversation that was coming. Not what I wanted to say, what I needed. Two things. The first, the truth. Clearly spoken. The true version. Not managed, not softened, not protected. Why did they decide without me? The second, for them to understand what they had actually taken. Not the money. Not the jewelry. The choice. The chance to be the one who said yes. Because I want to be clear about something before I tell you how the conversation went. I am not the narrator of a story where a family did something terrible to me. My sister nearly died. I was at the hospital. I know what those weeks looked like. I know what the word rehabilitation sounded like when doctors used it in the early days. Tentative, carefully not promising. My parents were in the worst weeks of their lives. They decided in a crisis because there was a gap in the bills and the jewelry existed, and it was the fastest available solution. That is completely true. And also true, they could have called me. In those worst weeks, on any one of the calls they made to check on me, to ask us if I was sleeping, they could have said, "Nadia, we need $8,000 for Mara's bills. Rose's jewelry is in the estate. Would you agree to this?" I would have said yes before they finished the sentence. No hesitation. No resentment. Nothing. They didn't give me that. That's the thing I needed them to understand. I talked to Mara before I talked to my parents, not about what happened. About what she knew. I called her on a Sunday. Told her I had found something in the filing cabinet. She was quiet for a long time after I told her. Then she said, "Nadia, I didn't know it was Rose's jewelry." I said, "You didn't know?" She said, "I knew they covered the gap somehow. I assumed savings. I never asked what specifically because I felt guilty enough about the bills as it was." I said, "Did you wish you had asked?" She said, "Yes. Now I do." Then she said something that stopped me. She said, "I've been thinking for 2 years that they just had the money, that we were okay." She said, "They weren't okay." She said, "They sold something irreplaceable and let me believe they were fine." She said, "That's what they were protecting me from." I said, "Yes." She said, "They were protecting both of us, Ed. From different things." She said, "Yes. From different things. Have you ever been willing to give everything, but had the giving taken from you before you could choose it? If you know what that specific cost feels like, type images in the comments. Because the conversation with my parents is coming. And what my father said, before I said a word, changed the shape of everything. I called my parents the following Tuesday. My father answered. Within 1 minute, my mother was on the line. He had called her to him, which told me he had recognized something in my voice from the first few words. My father is like that.
He reads the register before he reads words. I said, I found the receipt from the jewelry consignment shop. Silence. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of people who have been waiting for a specific thing to arrive and are now watching it arrive. My mother said, Nadia, I said. The pearl necklace. The sapphire ring. The gold bracelet from 1962. My father said, yes. One word. Before anything else. Before explanation or defense. Just, yes, I said. And I went to the shop on Millbrook Avenue. Another silence. Different from the first. I said, the bracelet is still there. It didn't sell. My mother made a sound I hadn't heard from her before. Not a word. A sound. The specific sound of something hitting you that you hadn't been expecting. I said. I asked them to hold it. My father said. I'll call them today. I said. I know. I said. That's not why I'm calling. He said. I know it isn't. He said. Nadia, I want to say something before you do. I said. Okay. He said. I've been thinking about this for 2 years. About the moment you would find out. And I have thought about every version of this conversation. And there's only one true thing I can say first. I waited. He said. We were afraid. I said. Afraid of what? He said that if we asked you. If we called you in those weeks and said, Nadia, we need to sell Rose's jewelry for Mara's bills. You would say yes because you felt you had to. Because Mara's life was on the line, and you couldn't say no. And then for the rest of your life, you would carry either the loss of the jewelry or the resentment of the choice. Or both. I sat with that for a long time, he said.
We thought we were protecting you from feeling obligated. What do you think I said to that? Option A, I told him I understood. That the protection made sense even if the method was wrong. Option B, I told him that protecting someone from their own choice is not protection. It's removal. Option C, I told him the fear was real, but the decision was still wrong, and both things could be true. Drop your answer in the comments, because what I said next, and what he said after, was the most honest conversation I have ever had with my father. The Saturday conversation, the in-person one, was 5 days away. Thursday night, my kitchen table, the receipt, the locket. I opened the locket again. The photograph. 2 people in front of a building in old light. The woman with Rose's cheekbones, standing somewhere that might be Naples, might be New York, the year she arrived, or just after. I thought about what Rose had said. Things like this carry time with them. The pearl necklace was carried in 1947. The emigration. The new country. The sapphire ring had carried the love that had given it. The gold bracelet had carried 1962, a young woman's first paycheck. The first thing she had chosen entirely for herself. And now those 3 things were in different hands. Bought by strangers. The time they carried was still there. Compressed inside them the way time stays inside things. But the people holding them now didn't know what they were holding. They held them as beautiful objects, not as witnesses. The bracelet was still there, sitting in a secondary location on a shelf, waiting. The tears came without warning, not a collapse. A quiet overflow I let happen at my kitchen table on a Thursday night with the locket in my hands. I cried for Rose, who had believed that saying a thing 3 times in her own voice was protection enough. I cried for the 12-year-old at the kitchen table who had been told, these go to you. I want you to know that now, while I can tell you myself. And I cried for the version of the story that had been available. The one where my parents called in the worst weeks and said, Nadia, we need $8,000 for Mara's bills, and we thought of Rose's jewelry. Would you agree? And I said yes. And Mara's life was saved with something I had chosen to give. That version had been available. And nobody chose it. I put the locket in my bag, set my alarm, and thought of something I had not thought of before. My father had said, I've been thinking about this for 2 years. About the moment you would find out. 2 years of knowing I would eventually find out. He had been carrying that for 2 years. I had found the receipt by accident. Or had I? A folder labeled Household 2022. Not hidden. Filed. Between the utility bill and the dentist invoice. My mother could have put it anywhere. She had put it in a drawer I would eventually open. I sat with that question for a long time. Then I went to bed. Saturday, my parents' kitchen. Morning light through the east window. My father had made coffee. My mother sat across from me at the same table where she had made decisions my entire life. I had the receipt on the table. I had the locket in my bag. My father said, I want to say something before you do. I said, okay. He said, I've been waiting for this conversation for 2 years. And I want you to know that the waiting has been its own punishment, not as an excuse, as a fact. He said, we were afraid. I told you that on the phone. We were afraid that asking you would put an unbearable weight on you in an unbearable moment, that you would feel you couldn't say no, and that you would carry that for years. He said, we made the decision ourselves to protect you from obligation. I said, Dad. He was quiet. I said, the problem with making decisions for other people to protect them from their own choices is that it doesn't protect them. It removes them. There is a difference between a choice you make under pressure and a choice someone makes for you. Both might end in the same action, but they are not the same thing. He said, yes. I said, I would not have resented saying yes. I have never resented it for a single moment. What I carry is that I didn't get to say it. My mother pressed her hands flat on the table. I said, Rose told me those 3 pieces were for me when I was 12. She told me again at 20. She told me the last year of her life. She said it 3 times because she wanted it on record. She wanted me to know while she could still tell me herself. I said, when you sold them without asking me, you overrode what she had put on record. Not intentionally. In a crisis. But you did. I said, and the trust. The trust she placed in you when she told you her wishes. That was the thing that mattered most. More than the jewelry. More than the money, Father said. You're right, HT. No qualification. No addition, he said. She trusted us with her wishes. We made a fast decision in a moment of panic that I would not make again. My mother said, Nadia. The folder. I said, yes. She said, I put it in that drawer 2 years ago. She said, I told myself it was filing. But I think I put it somewhere you would eventually find it because I could not find the words to start this conversation myself. The kitchen was very quiet. I said, I know. She said, I'm sorry. I said, I know. I reached into my bag. I put the locket on the table. My mother's face changed in the specific way of someone seeing something they had meant to do and hadn't. I said, I found this with the receipt. In an envelope with my name on it, she said. We've been meaning to give you that since the estate closed. I said, I know. I said, Mom. You put the receipt in a place I would find it, and you kept the locket in an envelope with my name on it. Both of those things are the same thing, she said. What do you mean? I said, you were trying to tell me. You just couldn't say it directly. So you left the trail. She looked at my father. He said, yes, he said. Your mother is better at honesty than she is at the word honest. My mother said that's the truest thing he's ever said about me. And somehow, in the middle of all of it, we were all quiet for a moment in the same way, not comfortable. Honest. Those are different things, and sometimes they arrive at the same table. The consequences came in a sequence, each one specific. The first, the bracelet. My father called Millbrook Avenue that Saturday afternoon from the driveway before he drove home. He asked them to hold the gold bracelet. He asked what the buyback price would be. He called me the following Monday. He said, I'm buying it back. I said, Dad, it's... He said, Same thing here said. That you had said you would have said. You would have said yes immediately. I said, Icy said, I want you to know something. If it were reversed, if it were your bills, I would have sold everything I owned. Everything, I said. She took off a ring she was wearing. Simple. Silver. Something she'd bought years ago because she liked the way it looked, she said. I want you to have something that came from me choosing to give it. Not to replace anything. Just because choosing matters. I held it for a moment. Then I put it on. Her choice. Right beside the gold bracelet that Rose had chosen for herself in 1962, both of them on the same hand. The third consequence was the one nobody planned for. My parents started talking to each other differently about money. My mother told me this on one of our calls in January. She said, after the conversation with you, your father, and me, we talked about all the decisions we had been making quietly. Things we hadn't said to each other. Things we'd been protecting each other from, she said. It turns out we had both been very busy protecting everyone from everything, she said. Nobody had any information, she said. We're trying something different, I said. What's that? She said. Telling each other things. She said it with the dry quality she uses when she's being rueful about herself. I said, yes, that helps. I went to Rose's grave in December. I do this sometimes, not on a schedule, when I need to. The cemetery is quiet in December in the specific way of outdoor places in winter. The silence of things that are waiting. I stood at the headstone for a while. I told her about the bracelet coming back. I told her about the locket. I told her about Mara's silver ring. I told her about my mother and the folder. I don't know if she heard me. I believe she would not have minded whether she did or didn't. She was too precise for mysticism. She would have cared more about what I actually understood than whether she could hear me say it. Here is what I understood. She had said those 3 pieces were mine 3 times in her own voice, because she understood that a wish unspoken is only a feeling. And feelings, as she said, change. She had trusted my parents to honor the record. They had made a fast decision in a crisis and overridden it. And then time had done what time does. It brought back what it could. The bracelet. The locket. The trail my mother had left in a filing cabinet. Not hidden, filed. For 2 years until I found it. You cannot always get back what was lost. You can, sometimes. And the things you do get back carry more than they did before. Not just the original time they held, the story of the losing and the finding. Rose would have had something precise to say about that. I can almost hear the exact words she would choose. I drove home. My mother called that evening. She said, I found something in a different drawer, a photograph of Rose as a young woman. Larger than the one in the locket, she said. I thought you'd want it? I said. Yes, I said. Mom, she said. Yes, I said. The next time there is a decision that involves something that belongs to me, call me first, she said. Yes, one word. She said it with the quality of a person who means it. I believe her. It's a morning in winter. Early light. Coffee on. The locket is on my desk. The bracelet is on my wrist. I've been thinking about what Rose said when I was 12. Things like this carry time with them. She was right. The bracelet carries 1962, the first paycheck, the first choice. But it also carries the consignment shop, the 3 weeks it sat unsold. My father was making a phone call that he hadn't thought he would need to make. My wrist, where it lives now, it carries more time than it did when she bought it. I would have preferred it to arrive, simply, without the interim, without the 2 years of not knowing. But this is what actually happened. And the family ledger is what actually happened. Not the edited version, not the protected version, not the version where everyone made the right call in the worst moment. The real one. The receipt is in the ledger. The 2 years of not knowing. The folder labeled Household 2022 was filed between the utility bill and the dentist invoice by a woman who could not find the words but left the trail anyway. The conversation at the kitchen table. The bracelet is coming back. Mara's silver ring. The photograph in the locket. All of it. Here is what I keep coming back to. My parents made a decision to protect me from choosing. They removed the choice to spare me the weight of it. But a choice made for you is not protection. It is removal. There is a difference between a weight you carry willingly and a weight you never agreed to carry. I would have carried the jewelry willingly. I would have offered it without hesitation. What I carry instead is the 2 years. Not with bitterness, with clarity. And Rose, precise to the last, had built the clearest possible record. She had said the words 3 times. She had trusted the people around her. They moved fast in a crisis. And then the bracelet sat unsold for 2 years on a shelf in a secondary location on Millbrook Avenue. Waiting. The way certain things wait when they haven't found where they belong yet. It found where it belongs. That's nothing. That's not everything either. It's what I have. And I'm choosing to call it enough. Finally. Fully. Mine. Have you ever found something? A receipt? A document? A letter left where you would eventually find it? That told you a story about your family you hadn't known? And was the hardest part the thing itself? Or that they hadn't been able to say it directly? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. Type choosing if this story stayed with you. Subscribe and hit the bell. A new story every day. Check the description for more. I'll see you tomorrow.